Start
the-
reporting at the beginning.
The idea was that we want the output for these categories to be consistent. So the idea is that the highest value on each category would be a 1, and then there would be decimal values for lower values. So then, when we're outputting a score, like the highest a category can get is a 3. And then like the lowest they could get would be like a 0.25. And then I think that makes like the numbers pretty comparable across the categories. And you're not dealing with a situation where like a category is out, because if you have four values in a category versus some of these that have 2, we don't want it where it's like some categories outputting a 12 and then some categories outputting a 2. Like that's just I think that's kind of illegible. And not like, honestly, across like the scores would still be consistent and you would still be able to like have a useful number, but just from actually understanding the tool, I think doing that like 0 to 1 internal, scale internal to the category makes sense. So does that make sense for everyone? I think it seems like people are nodding in agreement with that ranking system. I think what would be most productive tonight is just to go through each of these categories and we can talk about whether they want them to be in the top, middle, or low tier. And the thing to keep in mind as well, not to state the obvious, but like just because something's in the low tier, it doesn't mean it has no influence. We're just looking at, is this the most important thing that the committee cares about? And Matt and Will, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free. Anne, I see your hand is raised.
I just wondered, we see the 13 or 14 criteria without all of the weights, just to get a sense? I know we saw them before.
Yeah, I can. I'll just put them into a list real quick.
There's a.
In terms of finding them, it'll be handy just to. Oh, thank you.
Gabe, if you have the link to the Word document, then they're in the list in that.
I don't believe I do handy, but I'm just putting these in the spreadsheet, so it's not a big deal. So
Thank you.
I just sort of a general comment on this, and that me, what we've been discussing seem to be a good way to organize this. Once we see some results, you apply these rankings and these criteria to things, and we see the results. We may see that something about the results looks counterintuitive, or it's not coming out quite the way we thought. We should be able to revisit these numbers. As if we can say this is a 3. Well, we meant this to be a 3, but we set it a 2, or vice versa. Some things like that. We probably will be able to tweak these, but I don't have any reason to argue with what we have here now. Yeah. And I'd like to see the results, and in my experience with things similar to this in the past is sometimes that your criteria, your ranking criteria, and your weights, you think they make sense. You see the results, and then you realize, well, maybe I didn't really rank these the way they should have been. Maybe I see that. So in a sense, you can tweak the weights and the rankings to you get the results you want. Yeah, but it's more like ultimately when we see the results, they will either make sense or not. Yeah, right. And if it doesn't, and if there's something about the results that don't make sense, we look back at how we derive the results, and either once we realize this is why the result is the way it is, we realize that, hey, that is the right result. It's just not quite what we expected. Or possibly we realize that, that we really didn't rank things quite the way we maybe thought it was going to work out. But I don't want to, my point is, and I'm being very wordy about it, is that, I don't want to get too deep into worrying about exactly what these numbers are. If they look right to us now, we run things through, we see what it produces for results. And we may or may not want to revisit it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do we have a control property that would be ideal? And we could see if how it fits against that control property? So it's like,
We don't have one.
this is Nirvana.
If there's something in mind.
I don't have any.
I mean, you kind of have to have.
We'd have to know what that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, I mean, it could be. You have to give some thought, like, how do you make that control?
Yeah.
On there, other than like saying, like, we expect this property to be like in the top.
Right, exactly, yeah,
10%
yeah.
or whatever, in which case, yeah, we could do something like that, just
Yeah.
to see, like, does this property actually meet
That,
that?
if it meets that, then by. The analysis should show other similar properties meeting that same criteria. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is really what we want to see,
Well, if
what we
you,
wanna do.
I guess if you have property in mind that's like,
Okay, that's.
you know, like it's next to a lot of old protected land. You know, it's got road access, something that like
Yeah.
meets the top piece.
Buildable, all right, exactly.
It could be,
That's what
maybe
I'm
it's
looking
even,
for.
maybe it's even an existing park.
Yeah.
On there, cause that would, you know, would have a road access, it would
Right.
be
That would be ideal.
probably something near there, wouldn't have any, like. Development potential would be like 75 to 100%,
Right.
so that would get high rank. So that would, and probably need a bunch of, maybe something with a trail on it too. On there.
Yeah, so we'll have to look at what the criteria.
I already
calls.
ranked mine.
Um,
Is there a way we can share or we can start to talk about how we might rank them?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to get this started.
Good. I had one question, sorry, on number 11, that so proximity to public access, easements. What would be like an example for the folks that live in town of that? Like that it's near Silver Lake, for example, or I don't know.
Anne Marie, I might be able to answer that. So there's coming to the top of my head very quickly. I know that the Elm Rock Estates development has an access easement through the back parcels near the cul-de-sac that connect to Grafton Land Trust trails. So something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's like if Pleasant Street happens, like that there'd be an entry to something, and then if this
Right.
was close to that. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Can we put our, if we're not there in person, put our numbers up? You can see what we're thinking.
Yeah, if you want to if you want to tell us like what your, unless other people have like an idea of what they want to rank at this point, if you have, just so we have something to work off of.
Again, I didn't see the email earlier, so I just looked at this list, and thank you for putting it up like
Yeah.
that. So I just through it very quickly. But for me, I went with number 2, and then as my first, and then 7, 6, and 3 after that, without, again, a ton of thought in terms of like what that might look like. But then number 10. Should we talk about, or should I just keep going and other people
Yeah.
can? All right, I went 4B next. 9, 8. Uh, 4C, and then 4A. And then I went 1, 5, and I did 11 last, I think partly because I wasn't entirely sure how that looked. All right, have at it, guys.
I think there's also 4B.
Yep.
Yeah, I had 4B after number 10
Oh, okay.
and before 9.
Yep.
Again, just looking at that list that was just created and without.
Yeah. Oh,
So
sorry.
the-
Format is
Excel
funny.
is so finicky sometimes.
um Well, you know, it's right there.
So this is a ranking basically from most important to least important.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing the tier system, then you would
Then you
group these into.
right,
the
when you're
tier
talking
1,
about
2,
like
3.
tiers 1, 2, and 3, you would group these into, with, if, say, 1 is, 3 was the most important, or number 1 is top.
Yeah, probably.
I went
One.
from, for me personally, most important to least.
And Shannon,
I had basically almost exactly the same list with just slight rearranging of numbers, but I was wondering, do we need to have, you may have said this earlier, but do we need to have the same number of criteria in each tier?
no, I don't think so.
I would cut off top tier after the first 4. Those to me are the biggest ones.
So I'm just highlighting, like, let's say tier 1, or the top tier is green for now.
Yeah, I agree. Even within those 4, if we, mush them around, I thought that right away, just the top 4 were easy for me.
Yeah, I think, in terms of the way this is gonna all work out, your view of this, as I recall from discussion earlier, was that, grouping these into a small number of tiers is probably better than just ranking them from 1 to n. Or is it, would it work just as well if they were just ranked in order, 1 to 14 or 13 rather?
Well, this is for the tier level stuff is for the criteria weight boxes that are on these.
Yeah,
So this is where, yeah, we were thinking having, like Gabe was saying that ×3, ×2, ×1 thing would sort of like indicate like this grouping has a higher priority level in terms of like determining something, is good versus this is sort of our next best thing, and then.
yeah, because if you're doing math on this and you're basically taking each of these 13 categories and the rank values, you're however many things are going into the rank values are applied to that, and then the criteria weight, you multiply everything by the criteria weight. If your criteria weights are 1 through 13, 13 would be your most important, presumably, if you're looking for, the highest, the highest number would end up being ranked the highest. So,
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how you want to consider like what's important, do you want to consider individual sections important, or is there, like in this case, like are all 4 of these equally important and sort of like.
Yeah. Right, so.
That initial.
Yeah, and I think, right, so if you're doing a calculation based on this, you don't want to have too many levels there, because that will spread things out so much that the lower ranked ones just completely vanish, effectively they vanish. Because you've got like a 13 multiplier for your most important criteria. Well, anything times 13 is gonna be a lot more than anything times 1 or 2. So you don't want it, you don't want that spread to be too wide, because you want, you want everything to be part of it.
Sorry, Anne has her hand raised.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, if I could switch my last 2, I'll put proximity to public access ahead of structure status. And then Dave, my understanding was that what we're first looking at, and if we could just zoom in on that, is like, let's rank them. Let's come to a consensus on the ranking, and then we can talk about how to group them and the weighting, et cetera, afterwards, just in terms of expediency. So maybe, other folks can weigh in just on what we think would be our top few, or top whatever. And then we can go.
I think that's a good way to approach it. That if we have a consensus on the overall ranking 1 to 13, we can then, so this ranking does not go directly into the criteria weight. We can then look at criteria weights. As you know, you essentially get that from the ranking. Shannon, your hand is up.
It might have been from
I'm
before.
done, sorry.
All right, so
Yeah.
Dee, Stephen and Trevor, you guys want to weigh in?
Any suggestions for changing the ranking here?
I have a question. You're ranking environmental protection potential. Is the goal to prioritize the acquisition of environmental protection potential? Is that part of our charter? When isn't that covered elsewhere?
Environmental protection, to me at least, is part of open space. And it's part of the value of open space. So that, you know, I think we take it into account here on that basis. I mean, I think we may be looking at similar concept as we develop the master plan. Well, there's portions of the master plan that probably have a little bit more focus on environmental protection, but that's one of the values of open space as well as environmental protection.
And that might depend, you know, that in terms of your question, that might be where it comes into the tier level, you know, maybe it's not fully within here, so maybe that's on like tier 2 or tier 1 or something, in terms of like when it gets a rated score. On there, something you sort of want to take into account, but it's not like part of your primary reasons for getting that property.
The tier grouping is recreation open space. Would we want people tromping around in environmentally protected areas? Probably not. You don't want to build a trail right between a swampy area.
Right.
But this wouldn't really be about building trails, right? This is looking at what open space in this town we might want to protect. And the open space might be purely from an environmental protection point of view, not that people are traipsing through it or we're worried about parking there or cars coming in and out. It's an environmental concern, whatever that might be. So like separate from it being open to the public or trails is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think, you know, the open space and rec plan is intended to cover more territory than just, it's not focused solely on recreation. Recreation is a key part of it. But it's focused on, you know, more, you know, conservation and open space, just general open space and conservation. From a conservation perspective, separately, sort of distinct from a recreation perspective. The plan kind of lumps all that together.
And you're right, Stephen, like obviously other entities are involved in these, sorry.
I'd tier that differently then.
You mean weight,
If you say those top 4 are tier 1.
Well, I think they're still, you guys are still on the 1 to 13 part.
Yeah, I
right?
know.
Yeah,
I'm jumping ahead.
Right, we haven't really definitively grouped those into any tiers yet. We're more, right, we're looking at, of the 13 categories, you know. Let's rank them in relative importance.
This was just a first shot at forget about the tiers. Let's just look at, okay, this is a priority list. So Stephen, by all means, you know, if we swap things around unrelated to tiers, let's just put them in some sort of order that we agree on is what I think we should try to do.
I was just asking because if I prioritize based on what the need is. Or what the goal is, and then that falls into tiers. I don't disagree with your organization.
Yeah, well, that, in a sense, that's what makes this prioritization project a little bit difficult because we're not focused on a single objective here, right? We're looking at all the reasons why the town might want to acquire open space. Recreation is one of those reasons, but not the only one. So, and how do you compare the value of recreation to conservation to preservation of forest land for carbon sequestration and, you know, really all the other factors that sort of fall into this concept of, you know, preserving, you know, open space for one purpose or another. I've kind of struggled with that a bit all throughout this process of, you know,
I mean, is there, any,
you know, for what purpose do I value this particular piece of land?
is there anything in the open space plan that would sort of guide that thought, like that sort of describe like direction that the town's looking to take, or
Yeah,
in the master plan or something
Yeah.
that might help?
I don't recall there being any really solid direction to come out of the, I mean, right now we've got the 20-year-old master plan.
Yeah,
We're working on a new one, but it's nowhere near the point of solidifying a concept, you know, some priorities
Yeah.
for, you know, for land use in general. Much less just for open space and recreation purposes in particular. And in the development of the open space and recreation plan, we didn't really nail down, say, relative priorities or particular areas of emphasis. We kind of identified all these things, all these reasons why open space is important, but we did not. In 2020 hindsight, I wish we had done more of this in developing the plan. In fact, arguably, this prioritization perhaps ought to have been included in the open space and rec plan rather than an activity to follow it. Some open space and rec plans I've seen have sort of done, you know, they've kind of taken a map of the town and saying, here are some priority areas for acquiring land for open space, conservation and recreation purposes. They didn't do that.
Fiona?
So there's some feedback that was gleaned during the open space and recreation plan compilation from the public that we can use to guide that, but there's also a statement of open space and recreation goals. There's 6 that could serve as a good starting point. The first goal being preserve and enhance Grafton's water resources. The second being protect and conserve Grafton's land resources. Then preserve Grafton's town character. Then enhance Grafton's existing recreation and conservation resources. Expand the recreation and conservation resources, and then connect them. So it's still pretty. It's still a bit nebulous, but it does provide some a little bit of direction.
Yeah, it you know, those were the areas that we identified. But yeah, we didn't ascribe any relative importance to those. We just said, you know, here are our goals. And then we listed a whole bunch of objectives under those goals.
The way you've described it to me, it doesn't sound like there is a reason to ascribe an importance different from any other importance.
Right.
Because the goal is X, Y, and Z. So we want to do all of those. And how do we identify properties that fit into, it's not always cleanly, but fit into one of those goals?
Yeah, and some properties may in fact fit more or less equally to 2 or 3 or more different goals. And that just, in a sense, you could sort of add that up and say, well, this property is good for A, B, and C, which makes it more important in some sense than a property that's good for just A or just B or just C. I'm not sure I would want to put it quite that way, but it's perhaps better just to say that, you know, this particular piece of property would be good for recreation. It would be good for conservation. It would be good for protecting water supply. I mean, all those different factors, you may end up finding that if it, yeah, I don't know. I'd almost have to see some results before I can
Well,
really.
I would just think of the same thing, that if one property could have fit into one property could have 11 of these. So it's hard to categorize. I like the way Dave put this, is that Nirvana might be that property.
Yeah.
That meets all those criteria. And then would be what is the best use of that particular property to meet the goals of the town?
Do you think it would be useful or helpful to try to fit each of these 13 into those open space plan goals?
That's what
Like,
I
just
would
to give
do.
an idea,
Thank you
like,
for this.
how they-
That's what I
how
would do.
that
I
would
just,
look.
yeah,
And-
thank you for.
Anne
leading
has
it up.
her hand raised, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So I will just note that, Fiona, I think you were just referencing the open space and rec plan, right? With those 6
Right.
goals. So it's interesting that they line up exactly with our 20-year-olds that Dave, you always refer to, master plan, where it was the first, it's preserve and enhance Grafton's water resources, protect and conserve Grafton's land resources, enhance use of existing recreation and conservation areas, preserve Grafton's town character. And the last one that wasn't mentioned in this was provide Grafton with a varied and geographically balanced recreational facilities and opportunities. So even though it's 20 years old, we are still, it seems to still be on the mark in this respect. So again, I don't, I guess I'm not really clear on what you guys in the room are going back and forth on, because I thought it was, I mean, I guess we can talk ad nauseum about how one property can meet 10 of these or one of them. For me, it's more of we're trying to create a bit of a vision or vision and or template in terms of looking at open space as other than just, hey, that looks great for this based on one person's point of view. That's what I thought we were trying to do with this, and just not getting into like starting to think about properties already and how they might, meet these criteria and whatnot. It won't be a black or white in my estimation. It would be something that either Fiona's office or conservation or land trust could look at and say, oh, wow, this one meets those top 5. Like maybe we should try to protect that. Or it only meets 1 or 2 of those, but look at the developmental potential over there. So, it's not going to be, I think that the end all, right? There'll be a lot of entities that will be involved in looking at open space or preservation going forward. It would just be similar to our master plan, like something that I refer to as I'm trying to come up with a vision or a plan or what I might think, how I might answer this particular question, I guess.
Shannon, you have your hand up?
Yeah, and I completely 100% agree with that. And I also think David nailed it on the head when he said this, he'd like to see some results first. So to add on to that, what I would say is this is just like a very preliminary way of generating some data and some results that then we will all look at, as Anne Marie said, and go through individual properties. But this is just very preliminary to get something up on the board and like a map and list of parcels, and then we can go through in more detail later. And the way that I see it personally is not really like an end result, as Anne Marie said. It's more of like a tool, a work in progress, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to just start generating some data to look at it.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is a parcel prioritization project where our objective is to evaluate essentially all the land in town, or the parcels that we're going to evaluate here, and attempt to arrive at some expression of, the potential value of this property for open space and recreation purposes. And we don't need to. What we're struggling with right now is just how do we get into that evaluation? How do we combine all these factors that we've identified here, how do we combine them in such a way as to at least begin to come up with a sense of the relative value of the different possible properties?
So one idea that just popped in my head is, what if you, going back to sort of like taking these individuals and putting them into your open space rec plan going, what if you base the like weighted criteria based on those 6? You know, rather than 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 6. You figure out which of these fall within there, and then, or maybe it's, you know, 1 point for each of them, and you see like how many of these. Figure out which one of these fall within which of the goals, and then depending, you know, they get their individual rate values, but then you take, you know, how many open space recreation plan point values they get, and that's the weighted value. So like if there's 5 goals that these meet from the OSRP, then the, you know, final scores multiplied by 5. You know, you're meeting 5 goals compared to you're only meeting 1 goal with this property,
Yeah.
I think. So that could be a way to weight them.
Yeah, so, you know, sort of to take what we have here and relate it to the 6 goals of the
Yeah.
open space and recreation plan.
Oh, I think that's something of interest, or if you want to do it.
I like that approach.
Does that make sense to everybody?
I mean, the only thing that when we're looking at it is like, do all each of the goals get one of these at least, you know, that would be this.
Right.
You know, if there's one goal that doesn't, then maybe that's fine. That would be like a further discussion, be like, well, does this matter? You know, then is it just, we're just gonna be doing the 5 goals, but so I guess like an initial exercise, if you wanted to look at that, just be to go through and, you know, see which of these would apply to which goal in the OSRP, if you wanted to do that.
And for me, right off the bat, like, you know, the structure status is at the bottom and it could probably be dumped because I don't see, I'm just going through quickly, anything in this plan relative to that. So I think it almost naturally aligned with this plan that we have, but we could certainly look into that further just to confirm.
Historical value of, well, you have historical value up there, but if one of the goals is to maintain the historical value of property in town, I think I read that as far as like one of those 5 goals.
Oh, I just was mentioning the number 5 structure status.
Yes, I know, but the
Yes,
structure could relate to historical value,
Yeah.
which is maintaining his historical value of something within the town or town property.
Right, structure status as it was listed here is basically the presence or absence of structures on the property without considering the nature of those structures.
Okay, all right, yeah, so we can draw that.
And I think as I recall, the reason for including that was that perhaps a property with a structure on it has
Less value.
less value than a property with no structure.
Maintenance.
How would
Yeah.
you say that?
But I don't think it will relate back. My point was simply that I don't think it's going to relate back to the actual document. I believe that I know historical value will, because there are 3 criteria, 2 under planning and 1 under EDC and recreation relative to historical commission, you know. Yeah. So anyways, I just was thinking that the way it looks without, you know, delving too much further into the actual plan, it almost might look as if we already did compare it over here because we all know this plan so well. But anyways, sorry, I don't want to.
I mean, I guess with the structure stats, you could go either way on that. I mean, if you wanted to drop it, you could drop it, but if you did want to keep it, then we could do something different with that one where, you know, whereas with the OSRP things, it's an added point thing that again gets multiplied. Maybe the structure stats, it's just a 1 times.
Yeah.
You know, so if it has the structure, it still gets counted in there. That just depends if you want to keep it in there or you don't want to.
Structure status may be something that's potentially useful to know about a particular piece of
right.
property, but it may not influence at least not to any significant degree. It may not influence
Yeah,
our perceived value of that property from the perspective of the goals of the open space and rec plan.
Yeah.
Knowing that it's there.
maybe more, yeah, like you said, more of a flag, like, hey, we should
It's
go
awareness,
see,
yeah.
look at this, cause that might be a follow-up thing, like, okay, it's got something on there, let's go check out what that structure is. Is it like an old rundown barn that's gonna like collapse on somebody if they go into it, or is it a nice, old house or
Dumped cars.
tons type thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I think most of these criteria do relate fairly directly to one or more of the goals of the open space and rec plan. Structure status, yeah, we understand why that can be interesting to know, but it may affect the priority of a parcel on the margins, but
So do you wanna take that one off of this criteria list then?
I say take it out.
what do you think? Can we safely leave it off for this evaluation? Wait a minute, we know it's of interest, but it may come into play only when a particular parcel comes up for consideration, but not in terms of prioritizing parcels.
I agree. I think it should be taken out.
Okay, so just to confirm, remove it, do you want me to remove it from the criteria, but leave it flagging, or just remove it entirely? Oh, it's not even flagged.
Yeah, right, do we even need to take it into account in this analysis that we're currently doing?
Yeah, I mean, you can take it out point wise, but
Yeah.
leave it there so that it,
Yeah.
there's a Y for structure or something.
Yeah.
Or we can take it completely out and it just won't acknowledge anything structure wise.
The more data we have, the better off we're gonna be, because all of a sudden we could go for this piece of property and find this big dump sitting out there. What the heck? Spent all this time. It's a flag. Let's make it a flag, not remove it entirely, but just flag it as
I like that.
something to be aware of.
That work for everybody?
Yeah, definitely.
So structure status you want deprioritized.
Yeah, it'd just be a flag piece, not a point.
Information that we gather, but it doesn't become a factor in the rankings.
Yeah,
And when there's a property found with this like unbelievable barn from, the 1700s, we can all be proven wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, we still
Oh, I
have
didn't
this,
know about that.
we still have historical value as a criterion. And historical
true.
value, if it's if the structure is of historical value, I think that factors in the
I
to
was just-
whatever extent we weight the historical value.
So anyone else want to switch around how we've got them ranked?
I would just like to make a comment about the proximity to the wellhead protection areas. I think that is like extremely important. And just should be, I don't want to dictate what the group thinks. I'm here to just support. This is your group's thing, but I really do think that is like a big priority. It's clearly stated in the open space plan, as well as our older master plan, and it's just going to be something that we kind of continue to have to, deal with. And I just wanted to put that out there, just for consideration.
I mean, I appreciate that, Fiona. This isn't my area of expertise, but from what I understand, we've got some problems, brewing in this respect. So if there was some other way that we could give you all some teeth in this regard, that might be good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be opposed to popping it above like the proximity to other unprotected open space. Because again, water, our current master plan, in addition to our current open space and rec plan, does identify protection of water resources, fair amount.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just, me, just thinking, just want to make sure that it's memorialized, but I yeah, I think it, at the very least, highlighted in green would be great, and considered in the, yeah, definitely the top 5.
On the podium. You
Mhm.
could pop it into 4 if you want.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, any thoughts on where the cutoff for the second tier should be? I feel like ease of access, public parking and roads, I would put that as like, that feels like the beginning of the bottom tier for me, like,
Yeah, for sure.
okay. So,
I just had a quick question. So are we going to use a tier system, or did you want to use something based on the OSRP goals? There, or look at doing some kind of combination, that might get a little bit more
Yeah, I would have to,
complicated, but.
I would have to sort of think further on that, and or like, because there's something that I like about the tier system that we're looking at here. And that, because it sort of, it seems to me to sort of group things together, kind of the way we've got them here, groups them together in a fairly reasonable way. And
Anne has her hand up.
Sorry.
And I do, I mean, what I was starting to think was that these do, all of these do relate in some way to one or more of the goals of the OSRP, and I think we want to keep that in mind. How exactly to factor that into this analysis, I'm not quite sure. I think we need to be, we need to make that connection somehow, but I'm not quite sure what the best way is to do that.
You could give them as bonus points on there.
Maybe
like,
so. Anyway, Anne had her hand up, and then Fiona, Anne Marie.
Yeah, so if we're starting to look at now, okay, folks are a little bit aligned with how this looks. Now we're looking at tiers. I would say, based on not only just Fiona's comments, but just the reality of what is going on in our town right now, maybe popping the wellhead protection areas up to number 4 and have that the top 4 be our first tier. And then we could start with proximity to other unprotected space, ease of access trails, and then proximity to land owned by the town of Grafton as the next tier. It's like I know what my bottom tier is and my top tier is. It's the middle, of course. But I could almost see like, yeah, wait, sorry.
So you want to take, because
No.
we don't have to have 4 values in the top tier. You want to take proximity to unprotected open space out of the top tier?
Yeah, let's pop it into number 5-ish.
Okay. Okay.
And like for our, how many tiers do you guys, CMRPC folks and or Fiona, feel would be beneficial to Dave's point of making sure that it doesn't get kind of watered down and whatnot?
Yeah, I think for me 3 is like the max if we're looking at the multiplier, because I think once you get to 4, you're looking at a possible maximum. You're looking at a possible maximum score of 12 for a given, or no, not 12, but you're looking at you're looking at a possible maximum score of 12 for a given, or 4. I don't know. I feel like 4, maybe we could have 4 tiers, but there's so few values. I think.
Yeah. So for me, we could go 4, 4, 4.
Okay.
Fiona?
Yeah, I just had a really quick question. I just want, Gabe might be able to answer this best, but did just the tier, just going back to the reason we're doing the tiers, I think that the tiers make perfect sense and are logical. I was just curious if Rutland's approach to this, I know that they've done something similar. Did they use a tiered system as well, or what did they?
They just went through to each individual category and assigned it a weighted value, and I think it went from
Okay.
like I think theirs was like 1, 1.5, and 2. So this is like a similar thing. And then with I haven't worked on that in a while, but within each category, it was like, I think it was like a 1, it was like usually like a 1, 2, 3, 4, like some sort of value like that.
Okay,
At the most. So very similar system to what we're talking about here.
Okay.
But when we reviewed it, we didn't think, I just thought the tiering, like, then we can kind of group stuff together. But when I went through that with their AgCom, we just went through each value and we're like, okay, this one's important, this one's not as important.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
I think either way, this was, if we don't use it or if we don't go with the tiers or not, it was kind of like a valuable exercise in terms of sorting out like what our priorities were, right?
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
is,
I like these 3 tiers.
yeah, this is helpful for us to, you know, to rank these factors in terms of what overall, what we think is most important to least important. And there may end up being other ways we discover that they can be calculated or combined, but right now I don't have a problem with this. I think anybody have a problem with the rankings here and the grouping? We can always rethink it.
Yeah, it's less about the ranking now, it's more about the grouping.
Yeah.
Because each of the tier 1, which is times 3, those are all have the same, well, they have a different rating because of.
Right, but we're giving them the same, right? We would be giving them the same weight.
We are.
The same way, yeah.
Yeah, and I each one of those earns the same weight,
Yeah,
wouldn't be called out separately.
Yeah, so in those cases, you know, the max value that they would get would be 3. If they were in the 1, you know, if their rank value happened to be a 1 for that particular thing, then it would, in the end, with the weighted thing, it would become a 3 on there. Here's the next one, so it'd be 2 and, okay, 1.
yeah, and I think this ranking from 1 to 13, or 1 to 12 now, since we're kind of, you know, structure status is ranked as, it's there, but anyway, not to label that, but so we've got now a ranking of 1 to 12, and we've got them grouped. The top 4 are roughly equal weight, and they're all very important. The next 4 are also roughly equal weight, but they're not quite as important. Same thing for the third group. They're roughly equal weight, and you can quibble about exactly if one of them is slightly more important than the other, but it's almost comparing apples and oranges in some cases. So yeah, you don't want to try to refine it to that level of detail. I think it's sufficient to say that the ranking and grouping we've got here says what I said, you know, the top 4 are all, we think those are the most important, and they're more or less equal weight.
Okay, great.
Will has his hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out from the example, or from the past project that you worked on, Gabe and Rutland, had 2 1.5 and 1. Well, I think there's the opportunity for this project to do like a 2 1.51 or a 1.5 1.251 if you think that there's less distance between these different categories. I think that might be something if the committee members have any opinions on that, or we can keep it 3 2 1.
Yeah, I think either way, you've got three sets. And it is, yeah, whether it's 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 1.5, and 2, or some other exact numbers, what that does is it affects the ultimate outcome of the calculation. And I think, Will, the way you put it is the distance between things, the numeric distance. 1, 2, and 3 gives you a potentially more distance between things, and that. Yeah. Whether that makes a difference in the outcome. Other than the numbers may look different, but it may make some difference in how things all combine together. I don't have a good sense of what that difference would be until I see some results. And see, well, use 1, 2, and 3. That gets back to what I was saying earlier. If the results somehow were counterintuitive, then you go back and, well, why did it come out that way? And maybe the reason it came out that way is because we had used 1, 2, and 3 instead of 1, 1.5, and 2, and maybe that does make a difference.
Yeah.
I can't evaluate that. Emery?
Yeah, so sorry, you said if you think that if they are close for us, you would go with a different ranking system? Because if so, for me, in each of these tiers, well, definitely tier 2 and tier 3, they are very close to each other, like almost interchangeable. Tier 1 for me might, I might be able to differentiate those better. So if you thought that it would be more sensitive, if given that each of these tiers for us were quite tight, and that could differentiate that better, I would think that we might want to go that way.
Yeah. My intuition is that 1, 2, and 3 are likely to work well. But
Yeah, we're not gonna, when you build this, you're gonna have criteria here and then the data on the other side, and you can just play with the numbers and adjust resorts.
So that was gonna be another question for you in terms of.
But wait,
thinking that you-
sorry, can we just get back? I can't see who's talking, but so the gentleman that just brought this up, I thought that his point was that if they are if within that tier, they're very tight, we might want to think of doing something slightly different than Rutland or the other town did.
no, the point was that the differences between tiers, not within the tiers. In other words, yeah, if you rank the tiers as 1, 2, and 3, the difference between 1 and 2 and the difference between 2 and 3 versus 1, 1.5, and 2. Now it's only a 0.5 difference between the tiers, and that I can see sort of intuitively. I can see that how that could affect the outcome to some degree when you're basically multiplying all these things together. You're multiplying the criteria, the 1 or the 0.75, whatever, and then you're multiplying that result by the weight. And
sorry, I misunderstood. So for me, the difference between tier 1 and 2 and 3 is there's a little bit of a difference there, and then 2 and 3 would be closer, but
yeah.
So then potentially it could be like a 3, 1.5, and 1 or something like that. But I also agree with what Dave was saying, that there's always this whatever we decide tonight, or whatever you all decide tonight, isn't what's going to be. We'll run the analysis for you, and then you all can change it based on the results.
So I mean, you could also just use the 3, 2, 1, but modify. And what I thought Will was maybe talking about was modifying the rank values rather than like 1.75, 0.25, using different number.
Well, you could do that too.
There, and then
Multiply
it by
a lot more.
3, 2, 1 or whatever, but.
Yeah. No, it's true. In your rank values, you could use whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But to me, the fraction of values that you proposed here, that looks attractive to me, because that basically says a rank value of 1 is it's more valuable if it's there. We're associating, for example, in the proximity to other protected open space. If it's a value of 1, the highest value is abutting multiple protected properties. Abutting a single protected property is 3/4. other protected properties within a quarter mile, that's a value of 1/4. Assigning a consistent value of 1 to the most important, to the most valuable part of it. If the value is 1 for all the most important parts, then the fractional values are of less importance. If you started with 1 and went like 1 through 5, you don't have, you have some that only have 3, some have 4. So it's to me, it's a little bit more complicated trying to assign the numeric values, whereas this system as proposed is consistent. A value of 1 is top.
Mhm.
And anything that is less important or less desirable is less than 1. So I think it has an advantage in keeping the calculations and the meaning interpretation fairly
Yeah.
straightforward.
The numbers being a little smaller, so a little more better understand.
So in terms of the tweaking piece, that's something you'd like to be able to do on
Well, can,
Excel
if,
size things, or,
or if you have an Excel, I would do it.
I mean, we can output data to an Excel, yeah. We can probably do that, I just have to give some thought in terms of the model and how that would function.
I think
Yeah.
it'd be, if you're changing criteria, let's say the 3, 2, 1 multiplier, we wanted to make it to 1.5 and 1. We wouldn't want to have to go back or wait for 30 days to come back and see that result. I think we'd want to evaluate that on the fly. That's my preference.
I think it'll be handy once you put these criteria in order, and then we get to see like the notes and the criteria data coming through, in that order, to see how the rank value might affect that, in my opinion. Because I'm still looking at this document, because I didn't look at it earlier. So now with it being in rank order, it might be a little bit easier to see, what I think the difference might be. And so for this evening, sorry, Dave, to interject, but is this what our goal was to try to rank these or to get them in order for you all? And then we can come back and look at the rank values, or do we want to discuss the rank values tonight?
I think the primary objective of this evening was to.
So we met the objective tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the main objective was to do the weight,
Yeah.
the criteria weights. If you're fine with the rank values number, like the 1 through 0.25, then we'll just stick with that. But I mean, if you have discussion you want to do, I would say you might as well do it now if you have the time, so we can just hash it out, but.
Yeah, so I think it sounds like we've kind of nailed down, the.
Yeah.
The
criteria weight.
The criteria weight.
Yeah.
We've got an ordered list of all these criteria. And we've grouped them into 3 categories of weights, and we've decided not to use structure status as a factor in our calculations.
Yeah.
And the next thing we have is, if we look at each one of these criteria, starting with the development potential, do we have the criteria broken down the way we want? I think we had looked at this a little bit last time.
Looked over that, because this was what, the original sheet was this one minus the numbers under range value on there. So the last time you looked at this was to review and see if like what we're using criteria matched what you wanted and what we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so great, we have it.
Yeah, I don't see where, I'm just looking through this quickly, I can't challenge what you've already established in these values. To me, I have no experience to judge it one way or the other. It looks reasonable.
Yeah, and as Dave said and Gabe said and everything, the one, starting at the 1.
Yeah, I
Nice,
like that, I like the max being 1.
Around there, yeah.
Yeah, I think that works well, and we, for the most part, when you have four four categories, the criteria breaks down in 4 ways. 0.25, 0.5, 0.7, 0.5, and 1. That I wouldn't want to try to argue that, well, that 0.25 really is a 0.33 or something. You do have to think for a moment about like in number 2, proximity to other protected open space. We've got 3 possibilities.
Yeah.
Within a quarter mile, abutting multiple. And the values, the rank values that assigned to those are 0.25, 0.75, and 1.
Yeah,
Now,
it's really.
you could say, well, maybe that should be 0.33 and 0.66. But I like 0.25, 0.75, and 0.1 makes sense to me because 0.75 and 1 are both abutting. It's abutting 1 or abutting multiple. So those are relatively close together compared with the other one.
Yeah, which is why I went with 0.75, because it didn't, 0.5 seemed kind of low for abutting a protected land, it's like, oh, it's still abutting a protected land.
Yeah,
It's just
And then
one,
in
so.
number 3, proximity to other unprotected open space, it's the same consideration. Ease of access roads, on the other hand, you've got within a half mile, within a quarter mile, and abutting 0.25, 0.5, and 1. Which also makes sense to me.
Anne Marie and then Will.
Thank you for paying attention to the Zoom. I'm not.
Oh,
nothing
and
easy
hi,
to it.
sorry. Sometimes I'm unmuting and I've got my video on and I'm going back and forth. So I just was gonna clarify that, okay, so we seem to be all set there. We have some ranking, and then you all are going to put this into this chart that will be in the right order that we've just established, and then someone will send that out to all of us, I assume. So that we can kind of read these rankings, but I think that we're talking pretty much saying that we agree with the rank values. If we could just like see the chart in the proper order, given what we discussed tonight. And then if either Fiona or Dave or whoever this comes to can just send that out to the entire committee. Is there anything else from CMRPC that we need tonight in terms of moving forward?
Nothing that I can think of. Those were the main items that we needed for you. Once we had those, then we can start actually doing some GIS with this starting model.
Yeah, and see how that actually works.
Yep.
Yeah, Will, you had something?
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. So for number 10, for example, it has 0.5 as the rank value for less than 50% of the properties within a zone 2 or IWPA. Does that mean what if 0% of the property is within a zone 2 or IWPA, that would be 0, not 0.5? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how, so we can add that as like another line, but when I've been reading this, that's kind of how I've been interpreting it, how it would end up. So like for the one above, if there's no property within a quarter mile of town-owned land, I would also say that's a 0, right?
Yeah,
So
that's the way I've been interpreting it too, and I think that
makes sense.
if I had a stake in this, that's what I would prefer. But I was just wanting to clarify with that with you and Matt to see if that's what the committee understands it as well.
Yeah, thank you.
There's just
Clarifying.
for the wellhead, for the wellhead one. So if it's less than is 0.5, but what if it's nothing?
Yeah, I think is there a difference? You know, where some of the property is within a zone 2, then we distinguish how much it is, but yeah, if less than 50% could be 0, and if if 0% of the property is within a zone 2, then
It's 0.
with the rank value, that means 0.
25% is within. Is it still 0? Or is it 0.5? What if it's 0? It's just 0.
0.5, right?
Yeah,
would think.
my understanding was anything above 0, so even like, 1% would be 0.5 under this,
Okay. Yeah.
criteria.
Yeah, because some of these, yeah, the property, it's going to be, everything is going to fit one of these. But in other categories, yeah, if it, going back, for example, to proximity to other open space. We've got a rank value of 0.25 for within a quarter mile. We don't really say, but maybe it's implicit in all of these that if the particular parcel doesn't fit into any of these categories, it's a 0.
Yeah, basically, and I can add a note to the document that says that if it doesn't fit it in, it's a 0.
Anne Marie is up next. Sorry.
Hey, thank you. I would just say that I love that the gentleman that just was speaking, who said that if he had, a stake in this game, he would look at this differently. So, or however you guys would look at it. So for me, this is not my forte, and I would welcome from CMRPC how you might see that this would benefit us, right? In terms of looking at these weights, and this would not be my forte.
Yeah, thank you. I think that how I would understand it is that there should be a rank value of 0 for some properties if they don't fit what the lowest one is. So that means I guess the only one that would be a little not intuitive to me would be the number 10, because is there a difference? Do we want to add like a 0.25 for less than 25% of the properties within a zone 2 or IWPA, or do we want to keep it as is? I think that would be the only thing that I would propose in this. Besides that, it makes sense to me.
I would say yes, because even a quarter of a property being in a wellhead is important.
Yes, agreed. Thank you, Will, and thank you, Fiona.
So that means that so as of now, a quarter of the property, or less than a quarter of the property, say 20% of the well, would be 0.5. And I think from your understanding, that should stay 0.5. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm like trying to make sure that I'm grasping. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think we can leave it as is.
And by the way,
Okay.
now we have the ranking, right? We'll see this chart again with our ranking order. And then when you put all these numbers in with the weights and whatnot, folks like Fiona and Will and not me can certainly look at this and make sure that we feel that how we weight this is appropriate, right? In the long run, how this all flushes out.
Definitely.
Okay, so just so I make sure I have my notes right, there's gonna be, when we say 0, greater than 0, between more than 0 to 25%, or should we, to eliminate the 0 question on that one? Rather than saying 25% and less, or?
Well, it says less than 50% of the property within zone 2.
Yeah, but we were gonna
If
add
it's
a
not
third.
it's not within that zone at all, it's not even qualified for a ranking.
Yeah, I think we were gonna add
Zone, just by nature, it's 0.
Yeah, but I mean, so I would maybe change the wording a little, just because like, when I first was reading this, interpreting that, I was thinking 0, because we say less than 25%, that would imply, to me, that implies 0 to 25%.
Yeah.
Would get.
It's less than the property within zone 2 or IWPA, so the language states, as you'd interpret that if it's not within either of those two, it doesn't rank at all.
But less than 50 would. to
Right,
me
less
implies
than 50
0 to
what?
50%.
0 is less than 50.
50%.
Less than 50 of what?
less than 50% of the property is in,
Not the property.
yeah, but
It's
that's what
within
we
the
say.
zone
Zone.
2 or the IWPA.
But we said less than 50% of the property is in zone 2, so if like 0% of the property is in zone 2, I would interpret that to mean that gets a value, because,
I don't think that way, but
Yes.
so you're,
but I mean,
so
that's fine.
you're suggesting adding in another, top line that says if it's 25%.
It doesn't really matter on there, I mean, if you think it gets interpreted with not counting 0, then that's fine with me, I just was wondering
Well, it's how
if you
you
wanted
connect it.
clarification in the text or whatever, I know that, that we're not including 0 on here, it's just more of like. Did you want like that to specifically say that in the text rather than saying less than 50% type thing? But it's fine either way on there. I mean, in this case. Then we're gonna have a new category in there too, if I'm correct, less than 25%.
No, Matt. So I think what Fiona and Anne Marie were saying was that it's really important even if there's like 20 or 15% in zone 2 or IWPA, so they'd like to keep the rank value at 0.5.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where we kind of ended up in that discussion, was that the point was that we wanted to make, if even a little bit of the property is
Oh,
within
okay.
zone 2,
Mhm.
anywhere from greater than 0 but not more than 50%, or greater than 0 but less than 50% gets a 0.5.
Okay.
Gotta scratch it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my main suggestion for this would just be to add a line saying, just when a line to each of them saying when the rank value is 0. I think that would make it easier for whichever one of us ends up doing the GIS to figure out what the rank values are.
Yeah, I think in most cases, for example, number 11, proximity to public access easements. If the property abuts a public access easement, it gets a 0.5. If it contains a public access easement, it gets a 1. But if it doesn't do either one of those, it gets a 0. And that's sort of implicit. That's implicit in the way this is described.
Yeah.
In the case of the zone 2/IWPA, the way it's described, the words here, less than 50% includes 0. And so if we say greater than 0 but less than 50%, that kind of brings into the same thing, where if it doesn't fit either one of those, it gets a 0.
Yeah, that's just what I was
Right,
implying in terms of like
Yeah.
clarifying, because the same is for number 6 too, because that's less than 35% for biomap and Mass DOT wetland.
Right, so in general, less than X% of something should be greater than 0 but less than. It should be understood that way at least.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the
Thank
only-
you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. That will work.
Yeah, the only time where we include 0% is in number 1, where we said development potential of 0 to 25%.
Yeah.
And that explicitly includes no development potential.
Yeah, that's fine, I think, as well.
Okay, great.
So Matt, Gabe and Will, so just so, it seems like we're getting, we're all set for the most part for this evening. But are you planning on, so the next steps will be incorporating the information into the GIS and then reviewing those results, once they're ready?
Yeah, I mean, I'll modify this Excel sheet, so it reflects the tier level. But then beyond that is getting the GIS ready and running
Okay,
the analysis on it, and then taking that output and putting it into Excel.
got it. Okay, great. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that we're not like over scoping you. I know you have like certain amount of meetings. I just don't wanna
Mhm.
have meeting creep going on, but make sure that we're like hitting all of our goals that we needed to this evening and that, you know, we're not, we're on track from your perspective as well as ours, so.
Yep, yeah, gives us everything we need in terms of to do the model piece on there. There may
Awesome.
be one or two follow-up questions to you as we do it or whatever, if we need to get a little clarification on a particular data or.
Before, yeah,
So it's like that, but otherwise I think we're good.
awesome.
All right, have we accomplished everything we set out to do this evening?
Well, I think for the CMRPC folks, yep, and Fiona.
All right, well,
Alrighty.
with that, the only other agenda item we had for tonight was to review previous meeting minutes, which Shannon was unable to provide for us. So that leaves us with adjournment.
Well, I just had a question, Dave. Maybe it's out of order, but I believe that this is the time of year that we are looking for committees to give us reports on the status of, you know, how they're doing in terms of meeting the open space and rec plan goals.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
And our committee's annual report is due in at the end of January. So indeed, I had planned to send out to the various responsible parties the solicitation of their updates to their progress on the open space and rec plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing that, Dave.
I should have put that on the agenda just because we'll mention it, but yeah, that's something that we'll put that out, we'll send that out to them and hopefully we'll get all their input by the end of January. And we can follow up on that more at our next meeting in January if we need to.
Okay, great. So maybe we could put that on the agenda as an agenda item for next meeting.
Yes, I will probably remember to do that.
No worries. Thank
That's
you.
next year. That's next year. It's all year away,
Long
right?
time
And
away.
actually, I already have meetings scheduled, so I just wanted to confirm that the third Wednesday of the month was in fact including like the second or third of January. So it was,
Yes, our third Wednesday of the month would come out to be January 17th.
okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so yes, if we could just make sure that we have on the agenda in January for, you know, just to update on reports from town committees, et cetera, relative to the open space and rec committee items.
Yeah.
And with that, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that this meeting be adjourned. Motion is not debatable. We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Crowley?
Stephen?
Ms. Foley?
Fully aye.
Shannon?
Hi.
Trevor?
Aye.
And Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned. Thank you all.